see, I've been around for a few years, so I can see the trends. So in the 80s, everybody was depressed. In the 90s, everyone is a guy, hypoglycemic. In the oddies, everyone's anxious, and then in the teens, everyone's ADHD and narcissistic.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast, where the truth will set you free.
Welcome. I'm here today with Joan Landes, a clinical mental health counselor who is going to tell me about her experience in the field. And I'm looking forward to a great conversation. So welcome, Joan.
Yeah, Ryan, this is really great. Let's get going.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. So first of all, let's start with some of your background and history. Kind of where did you come from? Who are you?
Okay, so I was raised in the Intermountain West and got married at age 18, had my first baby at 19, graduated college with two babies under my belt. Um, Actually, what happened was I was an art major. My husband said, "Gosh, honey, I'm going to be done next year. What about you?" And I'm like, "What?" So I picked up the fastest major I could get done, which was a bachelor's of clinical psych. So I almost got a double major, finished that, and then had babies. So I had 7 children in total. And after that, they start leaving the house and you're like, wow, I have to do something to keep busy. So I went back to grad school, and it was really interesting, just the change in those about 25 years, just in schooling in general. I remember sitting down in my grad school and in the first teacher, and I'm like, wow, I feel like they're pretending to teach and we're pretending to learn. It was very interesting.
Wow.
Some of my other teachers were better, but that first one, I was like, what have I signed myself up for? And so got my degree, practiced in all kinds of settings. So private settings, public settings, religious settings, private practice now, things like that. So I've kind of been everywhere, and I've done residential treatment with teen girls for quite a few years and found out a lot about that. And so that's what I've been up to. Right now, I am not doing any therapy proper. I'm doing life coaching, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Um, but yeah, so.
I've heard a lot of people make the shift from therapy to coaching, so that's interesting. So you said you had the kids leave home. What kind of motivated you? Was there something that motivated you specifically to become a therapist? Some population you wanted to work with? What was the kind of the drive there?
Well, I had so many dysfunctional things in myself. I tried to fix myself. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. I mean, it's probably true for a lot of us, but I had an aunt that was a therapist, which in her day, that was really something because that was a little rare. And what's fun is to see downstream, my son's become a therapist. I've had clients become therapists. It's kind of a beautiful thing to realize that you can bless the lives of a lot of people and make a good living. And and I wanted something where I didn't have to travel and take homework home and have that kind of career. I wanted to be more home based and close to home. So, yeah.
Interesting. So what year did you go back to grad school?
That would have been about 2008.
2008. Okay. And between the two times that you were in college, what are some of the differences that you saw?
Yeah, right. So when I was in college, I graduated in 1985, and things were pretty, I mean, the most woke thing really around, the LGBT lobby, and it was just considered kind of the homosexual lobby. That was definitely present. It was present. And that's how it was. So this was not the 1950s, it was the 1980s, but it was more like kind of live and let live thing.
Hmm.
And there wasn't pressure to view things a certain way. It was like, if you have a client come to you and this is where that client is at, work with where they're at. And it was interesting because in grad school, the idea was that you are culturally appropriate. And which seems really that seems like a useful thing, but what happened later was it got switched to culturally appropriate meant the woke culture. So it had to align with the woke culture, even if it didn't align with the culture of the client. So the client may have grown up in a very traditional religious household, but if they come to you with certain kinds of problems, you had to kind of divert them into this more woke culture concentric type of point of view. And to me, that was not right. That was disturbing. So I just think the culture for the wokeified stuff has just become more and more and more intense. And my freedom as a therapist to meet the needs of the client right in front of me, who may have different goals than my professional credentialing bodies. I just couldn't meet their needs and feel like I could do that without getting in trouble. And so that is actually one reason I have become a life coach.
So that's it. Were you saying you saw some of this woke influence as early as 2008?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. It's always shocking to me because I went back to grad school in fall of 2022, and so much of this stuff was just so new to me. Like I didn't see it in my little world.
hmm
Oh, and it's always shocking to hear how far back some of the stuff goes.
Right. It was there. It was definitely there, but it just ramped up in intensity right over that decade. But yes, it was definitely there. That wasn't there in 1985. Like I said, it was more of a awareness of things in 1985. But I mean, it had only been about a decade since homosexuality had been taken out of the DSM, and so there were plenty of people around me, professors and things that they had spent their life with that being considered a mental illness or dysfunction. So I mean, I think there's good things. I think there's good things that have happened, and I think it's just gone way overboard. I think that it's good for us to be able to accept a lot of different people, and where they're at, especially as adults. However, when it's pressure for us to conceptualize things in a certain way, that's where I have a complaint. It's like, if my client walks in and wants this, they have certain goals, and I'm not allowed to help them with those goals because that doesn't align with the woke culture. Houston, we have a problem.
Yeah, I think you highlight something that's really interesting. That's kind of the shift in liberalism, or what we see as liberalism, where for the longest time, I remember in the '90s growing up with kind of Bill Clinton, it was this kind of live and let live mentality, like you were talking about. You do your thing, I do my thing. We're not going to mess with each other. We're not going to interfere in your bubble,
Especially as adults.
especially as adults. Yeah. And it kind of morphed into this idea of, I'm going to set the agenda and I'm going to force you to agree with me. I'm going to force you to go along with it. It seems, can you describe some of that difference that you've seen as that's evolved?
Well, I think one of the most obvious ones is my continuing education credits. It used to be that it just seems like the whole woke agenda has just permeated almost every one of those continuing education classes. And you just felt like you kind of could not escape it. That it was just an expected assumption that all therapists believe this and all therapists should believe this. And if you don't, you are an outlier. And so that's where I really felt it after I graduated, was those continuing education classes, which is simply the institutional credentialing formula to kind of indoctrinate all of the therapists that have been in the field for quite a few years. And it's fairly effective. That negative peer pressure is, you feel like you need to be silenced, and it's not good.
Or for like the continuing education stuff that you see as woke, is it mostly like multicultural focused?
No, I would say heavy on the LGBTQ trans thing, heavy on everything from climate change to population, whether you should be having babies or not. Just things like that even things like drug use that would have just been off the radar a decade ago. you know.
That's really wild to me that it's like you may think that climate change is like a serious thing that you should focus on and you should kind of devote energy to that, but that doesn't seem within the scope of therapy. Therapy to me, I think of two people in an office, one on one working through someone's mental health issues. And then it's like anything I think might be a problem, population issues, climate change, drug laws, all this, whatever I have a feeling about, all of a sudden that becomes therapy in some sense.
Well, that almost becomes an unspoken, implicit foundational belief system that's expected from the professional credentialing bodies, and that migrates down into the DSM, that migrates down into the continuing education requirements and what those courses offer. I just when I realized, hey, this was not the direction that I think is healthy for therapists in general and therapy, I just had to be very picky and choosy about who I chose to be my, wherever those courses were coming from. I had to choose people and providers that I knew were not compromised in that way and wouldn't be basically indoctrinating me for X number of hours. I mean, I did a little just to kind of get my feet wet and kind of see what's out there, but my problem is that I'll tell you a real turning point for me, and that was that photo I sent you, was when the Utah legislature passed a law that said that therapists are not free to treat the client in front of them if the client happens to desire to change certain things. If the client is not comfortable with their sexual orientation, me as a therapist cannot help them with that. I basically had a gag order. I could not help them with that. And that was very disturbing to me. Now, the way that they did it is they called it an anti-conversion therapy bill, but the way, and if you say conversion therapy and everyone freaks out, they think of electrical electrodes attached to people's private parts. And of course, that again that's part of the propaganda that the woke lobby uses to frighten people and to get people into that black and white thinking instead of that creative prefrontal cortex problem solving. And so it actually worked quite well. Everyone was freaked out and did not want to block a bill that was supposedly against conversion therapy. But in effect, what it said was if someone has a problem and they would like to change something about their sexual orientation or something about their gender identity, or they're not comfortable with their gender identity, I could do nothing to help them with that goal except follow the protocol laid out by the professional credentialing body. Or my license could be challenged. So that I think was a very, very chilling effect. Very chilling effect. And so I told people that had kids that had identity issues and things, I said, listen, what you want to do is you want to find somebody who's in private practice that's been around for more than 5 years, and they don't have to have staff meetings and defend their approach with your child that may not be the latest woke the protocol, and those therapists probably are going to be your best bet. They have the most freedom, they have the most track record, they've seen life before it was compromised by a lot of different issues, and that would probably be your best bet. Another thing that I think is really interesting is that I also was a mental health counselor in a public school for a while. And it's so interesting to me that parents don't understand that if your child goes to a public school counselor, that public school counselor cannot advocate your family culture or traditions. So if you have a Muslim family or you have a conservative Catholic family and they send their child to a public school counselor, that counselor is on just has to come from their secular, often anti-religious, anti-traditional point of view in counseling your child. And I don't think the average parent really puts that two and two together. If it's a government sponsored therapy, then it has to be secular. And if you are a very religious family or if you have a very traditional family, then that puts you at odds. That is actually culturally inappropriate in the way I look at it. That's very culturally inappropriate. That a therapist should honor and support the culture that someone comes from. If they come from Africa, they come from, wherever that may be different than the popular Western culture right now in the United States. It seems to me that that's what we should be doing, right? But no. And so I think that's where I really diverged from the latest and greatest fads in therapy.
It seems like, in the multicultural competencies, they're constantly pushing you to not push your values as a therapist onto the client. Like, don't push your politics, your religion, your values. That has no place in the therapy office. But it seems like they define that in a very specific way. So, like, if you're a conservative Christian, those are politics. That's values. That's religion. You keep that out of the therapy office. But if you have a very progressive worldview, that's considered not politics or values. That's just kind of common sense how they define it.
And that's, see, you've identified something really important, and that is that many of these people's worldview are so deeply entrenched in their core, they can't even imagine that other people that are logical and compassionate could see it any other way. And it's really a like a blockage of perception that it just seems so obvious to them that any sane person should look at the world this way, which is that's actually counter to good therapy anyway.
Mm.
So I totally agree with you that there's an assumption, like I said, this kind of foundational implicit bias that no one is really, very few people are willing to examine. Now you're willing to examine it, and I think we're going to. We may be at a critical mass here where there's enough of a cultural turn with so many other issues that people may be willing to look at this. But certainly, I think the trans issue was a giant wake up issue to the average person and said, wait, the American Psychological Association and the American Psychiatric Association are pushing to affirm a child into a new trans identity. I think the average person went, wait, what's going on here?
And not just a new identity, but also running these bizarre, untested medical experiments on these kids.
For sure. Because we know that once the social transitioning happens, that is a direct pipeline to all the other medicalization. And so I think the average parent kind of thinks, well, if my kid wants to be known as another name at school, I mean, what's the harm in that? It's interesting because I'm part of a Facebook group that is for parents of children with gender identity issues or have actually made the jump to be trans. And I think it's really interesting. I see it time after time after time. The parents say, you know, I'm a pretty chill person. I'm pretty liberal. Like if my child wanted to be gay, no problem. But cutting off body parts? Wow. And I look at that and I say, listen, as somebody who's been around the block a few times, let me tell you how raising children works, okay? 7 grown children. I have 22 grandchildren, of which I'm very hands on. We do a lot of homeschooling, do a lot of music practice, we do a lot of horseback riding. Okay, a lot of hands on stuff here. And the way it works is this: as a teenager, and you know this, but I'm just saying this for your audience, as a teenager, those identity issues are very fluid, and they're trying to go from dependence, which is absolutely appropriate as a child, to independence. And in that flux period of the teen years, they're trying to figure out who they are. They're testing boundaries. I like mom, I like dad. No, I don't like this about them. Okay, what do we want to keep? What do we want to chuck? And they're trying all kinds of identities. So here's the interesting point: wherever mom and dad are, as far as their boundaries, the child will push them 95% of the time. As they're a teenager, they will push those boundaries as an effort to establish their own identity. Okay, that's pretty normal. So as a wise parent, if you don't want your child to be cutting off body parts, what you do is you have to step back and actually project a even more conservative, more traditional family culture, so that when that child is doing some small thing that's like, hey, I want to wear a mini skirt. Well, guys, we try to be a little modest in this family. Okay, fine. If you have to wear a mini skirt, I'll allow you to do that. And they feel like they're pushing the boundary, they're finding their identity, but they haven't done anything permanent. And so I tell these parents, I'm like, "Oh, if you've got any younger kids, do a reset and start being really shocked and appalled at PG-13 movies. Like, because then they don't have to push so far to, do something damaging and permanent to feel like, we've kind of pushed the boundary on mom and dad." And you're like, yeah, terrible, that miniskirt, the worst. But really in your mind, you're like, thank goodness they still want to be a girl, right?
Mm.
So it's whatever your society accepts, that next generation will push in order to try to establish some independence. And so there's nothing wrong with being a little more conservative and traditional in your culture, even if personally you're like, I wouldn't care if my kid was gay. I really wouldn't. But you project that so that when they come to you and say, mom, dad, I'm gay, and you're like, whoa, okay, all right, we can accept this, but really you're pretty cool with it. And then they don't have to feel like, well, gay's not avant-garde enough, so now I've got to be something else. And I know it's not quite that intentional, but the dynamic is very common. For instance, in private schools that have uniform policies, one of the reasons they do that is so that they don't have to fight the goth stuff and the emo stuff and the it's like if a guy walks around, a boy walks around and his shirt is untucked, that is his way of saying, hey, I'm being a radical. Woohoo! We as adults are like, yes, super radical, untuck that shirt, right? And that's the usefulness of having some of those conservative standards.
That's really interesting, kind of take on the gender identity issue. One of the things that I hear so many proponents of transitioning minors say is kids know who they are. And I think if there's something that every society in human history has, picked up on, kids don't know things. I mean, as a kid, you think you're a pirate or a princess or a dinosaur. Kids go through all kinds of phases with not knowing like reality, not knowing who they are. And this idea that you should just trust a kid and then start running medical experiments on them and chopping off body parts, it's absurd.
Right. It's like that meme that says, no dog is a vegan. It's the owner, this great influence. And so it really is true that parents have tremendous influence. And there are a certain subset of parents that it becomes it fulfills something in them to have a child that is a little bit coloring outside the lines. Now, I don't know. There's all different motivations for that. Some are more clinical than others. And I'm not saying every parent is like that, but especially these 2 and 3-year-olds,
Yeah.
you're like, sorry, your dog's not a vegan either.
It seems to be some kind of, in certain, especially progressive circles, like a social capital that comes from having a trans kid. It's like, I'm going to be the coolest mom in yoga class if I have a trans kid. And you see these celebrities with 3 trans kids. The odds of that happening are just astronomically just unrealistic.
Right. Right. The influence of the parent is really significant. And we just have to realize that there are all kinds of motivations at play in trying to compromise little children's identity. To me, what makes some sense is that there is a fair amount of autogynephilia in middle-aged men most likely because of the plethora of extreme pornography that is ubiquitous. So because of that, we're seeing an explosion of autogynephilia where the men actually become aroused by dressing as the opposite sex. And then, of course, that is that is the pipeline to wanting to not just dress a certain way, but objectify and own the body parts that are arousing to you. So you don't just want to wear the bra, you want to have the breasts. And so there you go. You have to have some surgery. And, it was interesting. I was watching it was maybe a couple years ago, a video recording of a drag slut. I don't call them queens. And it was so interesting to me because there were obviously prosthetic breasts that had been surgically attached. And this person made a great show of punching their own breasts. And I thought that's a perfect visual example of the misogyny in this autogynephilia. That first, to own and possess it is the desired thing, but then it has to become more violent, then it has to become more abusive in order to get that same rush that they did initially just by putting on their girlfriend's bra. And so to me, the autogynephilia was really the moving force that in order for that to be accepted, because most people would look at that and say, that person has some problems.
I think so many people still feel like we're in this 1990s live and let live liberalism. I'm just pushing for gay rights because I'm cool with, people living their life like the way. And this is something so different. People say, well, you wouldn't want to discriminate against trans girls, would you? These are grown men with a sexual fetish. That's what this is. And you see some of these drag queen story hour, these performances where it's like a 5-year-old kid putting dollar bills into the waistband of these like sexually provocative men. It's absurd. I feel like in 5, maybe 10 years from now, all the progressives are going to say this was wrong, and they're going to deny that they had any kind of culpability because their heart was in the right place.
Well, think about the last 5 years. What other subject matter is on exactly the same track? It's COVID. Everybody's denying. Oh, well, we didn't insist on mandates. Oh, it was your no, no, no. And so they're trying to weasel out of that. I hope you're right about that. The difference is this. Here's what I see as the difference. The affiliate, the AGP people. One of the reasons that they want so badly for gender dysphoria to become attached to this is so that it justifies them, that they look okay. This is actually just a spectrum of the same problem. I don't feel it is. I think gender identity is much different than a AGP person who's acting out. But that's one reason that they politically they really embraced this, because the children having these same issues justifies them.
I feel like so much of this could have gone either way, but it's considered a progressive issue because it's like left-wing coded. It's like assumed to kind of be a left-wing thing. If you had just never heard anything about the trans issue and you heard, yeah, a bunch of Donald Trump supporters, these middle-aged white men, they have a sexual fetish of dressing up as women. Like, how would the lefters? They would be like, this is horrific, you know? But because it's considered like a left-wing thing, we have to support it.
Right. And that's I think there might be a critical mass of people who are savvy to that now, realizing we have been played, that we have had basically suicidal empathy, and that doesn't do anybody any good, very few people any good. It certainly doesn't do society any good. It's just a relief to know which bathroom we need to go into for the most part now. I just went, wow, okay. I feel like most of the time I know which bathroom to go into, or someone else does. So I think that the thing that the average person, what you said, the live and let live person, the thing that they don't understand is the AGP obsession is so powerful. And the rush increases if they can violate norms for women or children, especially innocent children. There's something that's even more arousing about that, to indoctrinate them and to bring them into the cult type of thing, into the brotherhood. What the average person doesn't understand is that when that drag slut is reading to your child in front of you, that is the biggest high ever. That is like, I am compromising your innocent little child in front of you. And the average person does not understand that. They think they're just being, embracing and inclusive. Let's bring my child and I want them to grow up, and understanding all people. You're like, no, you don't understand. They're going home or going into their car and masturbating, thinking of you and your child sitting there. And we've seen those of the AGPs in women's restrooms, dressed in women's clothing and made up with woman face, and them literally are masturbating, leaving semen on themselves on the toilet, and videotaping it. It is a major perversion, and the average person doesn't understand that.
I feel like if you've seen some of the pictures and videos of Drag Queen Story Hour, for instance, I don't think there is a person on the planet that could look at these highly provocative, sexualized men, dressed up like a clown, basically, like in this costume. Nobody on earth looks at that and doesn't say something feels off here. But if you're a progressive and your social capital depends on being open-minded and tolerant and woke, then you push down those feelings. And
Right.
I feel like there's been so many things in the last, 10 years or so where it's like you're deliberately turning off that alarm system in your head where like something's wrong, but like I can't say anything. And I feel like in the last year or so, it's like, okay, maybe I can say something now.
Right. It's very Orwellian to be pressured by the outside to deny your eyes and to deny your instincts and to deny your conscience. That is very Orwellian, but it actually works. It's sad to say people can call black white and white black, and do it with a straight face and a, they just feel very, very morally justified in it. It's a very curious thing about humans that we can be conditioned to get to that point.
Tell me how. Oh,
Wait,
sorry,
wait,
go
wait.
ahead.
I know the other thing I was going to tell you. One of the differences I feel like between COVID and the trans issue is that with the trans issue, the parents who have expedited and supported these permanent medical changes that damage their children for life, it's almost impossible for them to own that harm by admitting they were wrong. And I think a lot of them will go to their graves saying we did the right thing, which is different than the COVID issue. So I hope that a corner will turn and people will wake up. I think there's a certain subset that absolutely, because of the horrendous guilt that they will feel for expediting that kind of mutilation, will never, never admit. So that's my concern.
Tell me how you see the trans issue affecting the therapy profession.
Well, one of the ways that it's affected me is I had a parent call and say, "Hey, my daughter has some identity issues. So could you work with that daughter?" And they were a conservative family, and I said, "Yes, as long as you understand, that I'm going to honor your family's cultural tradition. If she wants to, try to stay in more traditional gender roles and things, I'm going to be supportive of that." And it was interesting because this teenage daughter basically what was it? She was diagnosing me. She was interviewing me to see if I was going to give her the diagnosis she wanted.
She was shopping for a diagnosis. Wow.
And she was very angry when I said, "You know what? Number one, I don't think that's the most useful thing to discuss with you at this point. I may or may not ever diagnose. That's the cool thing about being a life coach. I do not need to slap a label on you in order to get paid." And I think in a lot of ways, this generation, the Zoomer generation, has so identified with diagnoses for various reasons that she was very angry when I said, "You know what? I may or may not even do it, and I'm certainly not going to negotiate with you over it. That's not how this works. I'm the therapist." I kind of did that. Hey, don't confuse your Google search with my clinical.
That is. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
That is something I've only been seeing clients for a short time now, but there's just got kind of this like proliferation of pop psychology, especially TikTok diagnoses. And everybody in their life had this person's a narcissist, this person has cluster B, this person has damage to their prefrontal cortex. You just see everybody gets a diagnosis thanks.
Yeah, and see, I've been around for a few years, so I can see the trends. So in the '80s, everybody was depressed. In the '90s, everyone was a guy, hypoglycemic. In the oddies, everyone's anxious, and then in the teens, everyone's ADHD and narcissistic, and they throw these things around like psychotropic medication, and they don't have, they look it up on Google. It's like a horoscope. Me, me, like that, and they don't have the expertise and the clinical context, and so it's really damaging, I think, for a lot of these people to Google something, self identify like a horoscope, and then walk around saying, "This is my identity. I am ADHD and I am neurodivergent, and everybody just better clear a path for me because there's nothing that, I don't have to make any accommodations for other people. They all need to accommodate me." And it becomes a very, very political thing. And boy, if you don't think that the parents get pretty triggered by having someone say, "Okay, your kid may have a low impulse control and a very small attention span." Okay. So what do we do? So it's kind of, because the way I explain it to people, I'm like, okay, it's like if you're nearsighted. If you're nearsighted, you could demand that everybody print their signs 5 times as big because you are nearsighted. We could demand those accommodations, but you can see how ridiculous that would be. The normal thing is, what do we do to compensate? What can we do? We get glasses, we get contacts. Boom. Same thing with a lot of these other problems that people have. You can sit on your hands and say the world needs to accommodate me, but the biggest growth curve is when we say, "I'm not going to wait for the world to accommodate me. What can I do now to grab life by the horns? What can I do to compensate and make life better right now, and not wait for some new law or some, mother-in-law to, decide she's going to accept your neurodivergence or something. It's such a helpless way to be. And I think the wokeism really feeds into that. It says, look, the world is unjust. Therefore, you are justified in making demands of the world. And when it doesn't accommodate you, you have every right to be angry and to take out your frustration in violence and cutting off relationships and just really, really dramatic type of unhealthy coping mechanisms. I think wokeism has really hurt and made it hurt a lot of people in that way, instead of looking for what can I do now to help myself to become more competent, more effective, happier.
There's really something there to this finding a sense of meaning in having these words for my identity. I remember when I was 5 years old, I played soccer and everybody wanted to be the goalie. And the reason was because at 5 years old, the goalie was the only position who had a name to it. Later on, they give the other positions names, but, the goalie was special because it had a name. And I'm thinking if I'm, a teenager and I'm lacking a sense of meaning and purpose and a sense of identity, and, it's like, well, who are you? I'm just normal. That's pretty lame. But then you say like, well, you can have a cool identity. You can be neurodivergent and non-binary and gender fluid. And I feel like a lot of this is A, driven by lack of meaning and purpose, and B, just driven by boredom.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and social acceptance.
Yeah.
Because you get so much of the glitter family, you get so much of the rah rah support when you come out into something that is, a little bit out of the normal. Whoops, sorry. Did I just lose you?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't see. Just a minute. Touch something. Sorry about that. There we go. Anyway, that there is such a superficial glitterati type of support initially, and it becomes addictive, not addictive, but it becomes very, very satisfying because, like you say, a lot of young people are feeling empty and meaningless. Interestingly, if you look at the FBI suicide statistics from about 1904, okay, so I'm going way back there, they actually have statistics on this. And when the discussion was, if we don't affirm them, they will kill themselves, I would pull out this graph. And if you want, I'll send it to you. I pull out this graph and say, this is teenage suicide statistics from the FBI for the last 120 years. Look at this. This is really interesting. If you notice, suicides for teens took a little blip during World War I. Okay, they kind of went up there. But think about it, they had the Spanish flu, they had World War I, they had to go to war, all that. Okay. But then it was very stable, very low, very, very stable until about 1978. So think of American culture between 1920 and 1975. Affirming was that culture of sexual orientation that was not heterosexual or any kind of identity that wasn't, the male female. None. There was no affirming. And yet, the suicides started taking a significant jump in about 1978 when homosexuality was embraced, and that's when we started seeing the suicides. So I really, in fact, one of the leaders of my state's pride coalitions, I showed that to him before he knew my particular angle. I said, what do you make of this graph? When the idea is that if we don't affirm them, they will commit suicide. Look, here's the least affirming society was in the 50s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And yet the suicides were the least. And he looked at it and he goes, what do you make of it? And I said, I think the people who started that homosexual lobby, public lobby, have blood on their hands. Because there was something that happened that put the children in a position where they were supposed to come out, but then they didn't have the social support, but then they didn't. It just was not a good situation. Now, I'm not saying all suicides were because of LGBT issues. I'm not saying that. But when they say that without affirming they'll commit suicide, you just look at that graph and say that's patently false assertion. That's not true. And the stats show that. They prove that. So I think that, as a society, that we need to address the core issues, the trauma that tends to drive this. And oh man, they hate hearing that. They hate hearing that. They're like, no, I'm not even been traumatized. I'm just, cut out of a different bolt of cloth. I'm like, yeah, I betcha. I betcha there's something there. If you felt safe enough to actually talk about it, there would be something there. So how are we doing on time? Are we maxing?
Good. We got 17 minutes left.
Okay. Well, if I really want to get out on a limb for you,
Yeah.
there was a researcher named Joseph Nicolosi. Are you familiar with him? Okay, you'll want to look him up.
Okay.
He was one of the very first PhD psychologists that studied sexual orientation in men and how that developed and how to shift that if the man was motivated. If he was troubled by the homosexuality, Joseph Nicolosi Sr. studied what they had in common, and he treated thousands. He was stationed in California. He treated thousands and thousands of men, mostly men, that were troubled by it, and he found so many commonalities, and so much of it had to do with trauma, but another one had to do with, and this has gender identity written all over it, the relationship with mom and dad. Okay, now that's a very old classic thought, that there was daddy issues, mommy issues, but he developed a conceptualization of how that actually works, and it's pretty compelling. Long story short, he got the flu in California and ended up dying in the hospital. Now, the conspiracy theorist in me wonders if somebody in the hospital knew who he was, because there were a lot of the gay lobby that hated his guts. I just wonder. He was a pretty healthy 50-ish-year-old, and he went in for flu and died. But his son actually has, Joseph Nicolosi Jr. has actually assumed his role. He got his PhD. He's doing the same kind of work. So the conceptualization is this. He actually wrote a book called A Parent's Guide to Preventing Homosexuality. Of course, you cannot get it on Amazon. You have to look for it places. I have it. It's extremely useful. But to put it in very short terms, it says that gender identity and sexual orientation for little girls is actually much easier for them to accomplish than for a boy. Why? Because we're all born to a mother who is a female, who we attach to, and we, develop trust and a good attachment and all that. And then the little girl can simply attach to her mother and identify with her. And she gets her period and she just kind of goes on her merry way. It's a simpler process. Boys, it's more complicated. With boys, they attach to this female, they trust her, she nourishes and everything. And then what they have to do, and this is what Joseph Nicolosi Sr. pointed out, that the mother has to relinquish that child and send him into the arms of the father at about age 3, 4, 5. 3-ish, 4. If the mother does not approve of the father's masculinity, stop roughhousing, or you're being so mean to him, right? She doesn't understand that masculine parenting is necessarily going to look different than feminine parenting, that she insists on her husband being mom 2.0. That's a major problem. That in order for this boy to develop normally with his sexual orientation and his gender identity, he has to be able to be handed over to dad, and dad has to be two things. Dad has to be powerful, and he has to be benevolent. If the boy looks at his dad and says, my dad is weak, he won't want to identify that. So wives, do your best don't henpeck your husband, don't demean him in public, don't emasculate him, show him respect. That doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything, but show him respect, give him some great leadership roles so that boy and your daughter, frankly, can see the masculine role model as powerful and then also benevolent. If your husband has major anger issues, this could really turn off your son. He said that men have to be powerful and benevolent, and they have to invite that boy into the club of men among men and teach them some skills. So he has to be able to know how to play some sports if the culture is sports centric. He has to know how to work with cars if the family culture is car centric. He has to know how to, something that feels like this is a cultural script for men, that I can learn these skills and can be a man among men. That little boy has to feel like that. If he feels like he's uncomfortable being with the guys, he's uncomfortable being with the boys in school, he can't play kickball, he doesn't know how to play soccer, then you've got that first strike against him. So he feels like he doesn't belong with the boys, he can't keep up. And then if his father is either not benevolent, he's too harsh on him, right? Then that will be hard on him. And then so the boy will often kind of retreat. He'll try for a little while, but then he'll kind of retreat about age 9 or 10 into this fantasy world of video games. And that's where he'll get his competency. I'm really good at video games. The problem is we all know video games is one half of a step to pornography because they're so interlocked. So it's not very long until that little boy is into pornography on the computer too. But he has very little social skills. He doesn't know how to talk to girls. He doesn't know how to talk to boys, really. He's very socially awkward. The pornography starts patterning him on things that are more and more outrageous. And this is what Joseph Nicolosi said in his book, which was published years ago. I actually think this part is probably skipped for the most part now. So maybe age 14 or 15, he tries to kind of, connect with a girl. And he's so awkward, or he's been programmed by the pornography to approach her in a way that she doesn't like, because it's like, I don't want to be choked, I don't want to be, and so he gets rejected by this girl sexually. And then the locker rooms at he's in the locker rooms at school. And I'm not saying this happens to everybody, but this is one path where, because he's not comfortable with men, he's more comfortable with mom and the aunts, or his sisters. He's got lots of friends that are girls, not too many friends that are, that the male becomes the exotic, desired object. And we're talking about homosexuality here. The male. And so he sees this good-looking guy in the locker room, and he's like, whoa, something happened to me. I think I might be homosexual. I might be gay. And then you've got all the social structure of the gay clubs and the allies clubs and everything right there to just kind of pick up that slack and just direct him into, look, yes, we get you. And then he's in for a different pathway. And so it's just very interesting, this research and the experience of Joseph Nicolosi Sr. as being able to kind of connect those dots and saying, Mom, Dad, there really are things you can do with these young children to help them identify with you as your sex and you as your orientation. There really are things you can do. And I think when you said so many people felt empty, I totally agree with you. And a lot of people say, why didn't we have this in the 30s, 40s, and 50s? What has really changed? I think two things have changed. One, so many mothers are in the workforce and really cannot be with their children as much as they would like to be able to form those attachments and to show show the healthy role modeling. I think that's been a big sea change in our culture. Of course, some families have to do that. I'm not saying you're not allowed to have a career. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying if you want to improve the odds, spend as much time with your children as possible. And I'm not kidding about that. And I think that's where a lot of homeschooling comes from. And then the next thing is, I just had a senior moment. Oh, I forgot where I was going with that. Spend time. Oh, so the other thing that I think has changed too is the religiosity and the involvement in organized religion. Now, virtually every Gallup poll, Pew poll, and research study shows that children who both believe and are active in organized religion, so they have the social support and they have the belief system. They make sense out of the world. They're making sense out of, I have no idea what's going on there, but they can make sense out of suffering. They know their purpose in life. It gives them meaning. It gives them resilience. It gives them that social support, and they have that identity. Even if it's, hey, I'm a good Catholic kid that's an altar boy. That's me. That's who I am. There's so little of that anymore. And I think that also is leaving children very vulnerable to what you said, this feeling of meaningless, emptiness, loneliness. And so that would explain to me. And then, of course, that huge vacuum is being filled by the internet.
That was a lot of interesting stuff there. I have two questions left for you. The first one is, with the therapy profession, we've seen it become so politically biased, so filled with indoctrination, so slanted in that way. How do you fix the therapy profession?
It's like how do you fix politics? Instead of people who are more traditional sitting on their hands and saying, you know what, live and let live. I'm just going to do my job, put my head down, and just do my job. I'm going to take care of my family, do my job. We don't have that luxury anymore. We need to get active in the governing bodies of every profession and every county, city, state. We need to become active. We've been a little bit blasé. And so school board positions, things like that. And so even in professional credentialing bodies, if you want to be a PhD and you want to teach at the academic level, you may need to actually form, well, some schools are actually forming their own graduate schools that just have a different point of view. And it's out there. Our point of view is this. If you want to come be part of it, great. And you can find niche, that there's a niche for that. So that, I would say, we just need to become more active in the governing of every entity that we're involved in. I hate to say it, I'm not very good at that.
I like that. Last question. This is about applied to society more broadly. What is one thing that we're not talking about that we should be talking about?
The terrible education system we have in the United States. It is, I think it's a lost cause. And it's creating so much mental health issues for our children. If you look at the suicide statistics for how they parallel the school year, it's irrefutable. In Japan, most suicides of children was the first day of school, the day before the first day of school. They actually would have ads on TV, don't kill yourself, just stay home an extra couple days, it's not worth it. And if you look at US emergency room admissions, it just tracks exactly with the school year. It goes down during vacations and it goes up during the, and so school itself, there's something about how we are doing school now itself that is stressing out our kids to no end. I think it's a problem that I homeschooled a lot of my kids. My grandkids are pretty much being homeschooled. It's such a big beast that the average person can't fight it. It's just like, hey, we're going to have our own little monastery here. We're going to preserve learning just like just like the Irish monks. We're going to preserve learning for the next generation because it's being lost. And so I think the education system is the most important thing.
That was a good answer. I like that. Well, I have learned a lot. This was a fascinating conversation. Thank you for coming on. If you'll hang around just for a minute till the upload finishes, love talking to you, and thank you for a good conversation.
Thanks for inviting me. You're a great listener and great question.